than 60, many of whom had been on the trip for decades. The band's so-called career was largely an accident. The Grateful Dead never sought success. They saw themselves as musicians. They played music. The actual business of a rock and roll band was a mystery to them, and they couldn't be bothered with it. They didn't think in terms of wealth and fame. They hadn't sought it and didn't know how to value it. Eventually, they realized if they were going to manage their organization and continue to do what they loved, they had to come to terms with the commerce, and they made a grudging, uneasy peace with it. More than any other rock band, the Grateful Dead had enjoyed freedom from highly structured and rigid business practices. Instead of corporate bylaws, they had lived by a code vigilantly observed, which had served to create the Grateful Dead ethos. They had largely been able to approach life on their own terms, but with the level of success they had stumbled into, that carefree attitude was no longer possible. The band members and their most trusted associates showed up on Thursday morning, December 7th, at the band's old Victorian in downtown San Rafael that had served as their headquarters for more than 30 years. The new Novato headquarters on Belmarin Keys Road was not quite ready. They were there for a meeting of the board of directors of Grateful Dead Productions, the corporate arm of the famed psychedelic rock band. They were weighed down with grief, the burden of having to decide the fate of not only themselves, but of all the people who depended on the organization for their livelihood. Their long-suffering staff stood by anxiously. Drummer Billy Kreutzmann still couldn't bring himself to attend and stayed behind in Hawaii. It would be the last board meeting at the Lincoln Street complex, held in the upstairs room in an auxiliary building across the street from the ramshackle two-story gabled house on the quiet corner. In typical Grateful Dead fashion, the band had rented the building since they first moved to Marin County and had only recently purchased the former Coca-Cola bottling plant in nearby Novato, where the band's thriving merchandise enterprise had already been located under a rental agreement for several years, and where the entire Grateful Dead operation would now be centered. Just before he died, Garcia had visited the new rehearsal hall and offices and given his approval. For the last 10 years, the band had been the leading box office attraction in rock, pulling down a hard-to-believe $370 million in gate receipts over the decade. Now, that roaring river of revenue had come to a sudden and complete halt. The operation was in immediate economic freefall. They had already scrubbed an East Coast tour scheduled to start in September and laid off their 30-person road crew. Between the office and the band's merchandise business, there were still another 30 employees. Like many families protecting an addict in their midst, the Dead had lived in denial over Garcia's health issues. They had survived one near-death episode years before, but carried on while Garcia continued to sink deeper into the abyss. He had struggled for 10 years with his heroin addiction. Only band management knew that he had secretly made plans to enter rehab at the Betty Ford Clinic after Soldier Field that July. The management team had questioned among themselves whether the September tour would happen. Garcia, chafing against the detailed routine, bolted Betty Ford after a few days, but had checked into another treatment facility in Marin County when he was found dead in the middle of the night. With such a large organization, it would make sense that a financial plan would have been in place to cover unexpected catastrophic events, such as the death of the leader. Yet nothing like a plan had ever been developed. The Grateful Dead operated like a minimum wage worker, living paycheck to paycheck, without preparation for the future, acting like things would never change. They had worked for years, but had little to show for it, other than expansive lifestyles and large debts. With a number of dead employees already gone and more layoffs booming, Garcia's death forced instant hardships on those he left behind. These were mostly people who had labored beside the band for 30 years or more. The egalitarian Dead treated them like family. They paid salaries well above the industry norm and extended all kinds of financial assistance to their people. When a fallen redwood tree crushed manager Cameron Sears' home during a New Year's Eve show while the house was vacant, the band loaned him the money.